Hi, Rohini. So nice to have you here. Thank you for accepting my invite this week.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Great. For the uninitiated, Rohini is a leadership, life, and money coach. That's what your LinkedIn bio says, Rohini, but I want to explore a lot more of because, all of us are quite multi hyphenated. So I would love to know more about it. I know you've been doing coaching for around almost 10 years now. I also know that you worked in the financial industry, and the last like formal role that I guess you held was the head of thematic equities in UK. You are a pass out from IIM Bangalore class of 1991. So you have almost like 35 years of experience behind you. And I've heard beautiful, wonderful things about you from your coaches. So it's a pleasure and honor to be talking to you in this capacity today. Welcome to the Unscripted Career.
Thank you so much, Swati.
Great. So, in your own words, I would love to understand what the career journey has looked like and what the life journey has looked like in the past 30, 40 years of like formal education. Was IIM Bangalore something that you always aspired to go to, or did it happen by some stroke of chance? So, would love to learn more about it.
Yeah. So first of all, when you were saying I'm 1991, I was thinking, gosh, that makes me sound so old. But I think I would say that from the very beginning, my parents were very a lovely balance of just allowing us to create our own scripts. But if we went too far off, like they thought, then they would step in. So I would say IIM Bangalore, going to the IIMs was, I didn't grow up dreaming of doing that. It felt like, okay, what shall I do next? What's the next sensible thing I can do when I didn't really know what I was meant to do in terms of career. And that's how it kind of happened. And I sometimes think back at my days at IIM, and I think I sleepwalked through it. Like, how did I even what did I even learn? I can't remember. There's so many huge gaps in my memory. But I think the thing that really did stay with me is that feeling of community, the friendships that I formed, and actually, funnily enough, the things I remember are the things that didn't happen in the classroom. The lessons that we learned um, in the sort of friendship groups and the things that we did as a class, and that's what stayed with me. And I think from there again, the whole initial part of my career was very random in some ways. When everyone else was going for campus interviews for their first, step on the career ladder, I got the option to come to London because my father at the time was a naval attaché in the Indian High Commission. It was probably going to be one of his last, roles before he was going to retire. So it was a nice, prestigious, and very different kind of role to what he'd done up until then. And with that came the opportunity for me to come to London to stay with my parents on a diplomatic passport. And if you're not aware of it, a diplomatic passport comes with lots of lovely benefits, So you can work while you're here. You get invited to lots of very nice things like, events at Buckingham Palace and things like that. So I just thought, you know what, such an opportunity will never come back for me. And even though I was not someone who wanted to live abroad, I deliberately had not chosen to go and study abroad because I thought, if I go and study abroad, I'll never come back, because that's kind of what we saw around us, right? And so my thinking was, okay, this is one chance to go and experience life in a foreign country with the knowledge that I'm going to come back and, be really patriotic and, work in India and all of that. So I went there, very coolly, like not particularly bothered that everyone else was, getting their career started. And I just thought, well, I've just graduated from one of the best business schools in India. Of course, I'm going to get a job when I go there.
Yeah.
And this is before the internet, before you had a chance to go and Google and find out what's going on elsewhere in the world. None of that. I sort of very confidently, like the confidence of youth. I went to London, didn't research anything, just assumed that I was so good that I would get a job. And then you can imagine what happened. I went there and they were having one of the worst recessions. Even British graduates were not getting jobs. And of course, a little old me, turning up from India with an MBA that the Brits didn't really care about. Even to this day, I think the Brits probably care less about things like MBA than maybe other countries. Like the US, of course, it's a big thing. In India, it's a big thing. So it was very quickly, it was a sort of real humbling experience to realize that actually no one cared about my MBA. And I always thought I was quite a good salesperson. I just thought I had this natural ability to influence people, to persuade people. I'll be great, in a marketing role. And when I went to my interviews, I realized that actually maybe in India I was quite good with those things. But when you come to a different country, a different culture, where you don't really fully understand how that market works, you're not so good. And so I displayed my own naivete in those interviews. And when I look back now, like even I wouldn't hire myself. Like, what was I thinking? So it was a real sort of eye opener and quite depressing as well. Like I thought even before my career started, God, it's all finished. And then I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to go back to India and how embarrassing. Like everyone's going to say to me, what did you do in London? I'm like, nothing. I just watched daytime TV, read lots of library books. It was just too embarrassing. And I thought, I can't go back. I have to do something. And so as luck would have it, I got talking to somebody through one of my parents, social things. And he said, oh, I work for an insurance company and we're looking for people to sell. I said, yeah, anything. I'll do anything, anything. And so I said yes. And I went to this job, which was commission only. And we had to cold call people to try and get them to see us so we could sell them insurance and other products. And I thought, I'm going to get trained. He said, don't worry, you'll get training. But my accent betrayed me. Like as soon as they could tell I was from India and they could tell I knew nothing. So I was
And
terrible.
those were the days when like the Indian salespeople were not as much of a norm, right?
That's right. I mean, these days, of course, call centers are,
Yeah,
generally in places like India. This is way back. This is end of 91, right? Were you even born in 91?
I was comfortably like a few years old by
Okay, good.
then.
Phew.
Uh,
So you might vaguely remember what life was like in those days. There's no internet, laptops, things like that. Anyway, but I thought, what, it's okay. My parents were so lovely, they never put pressure on me. They didn't make me feel bad about the fact that I was not earning anything. They were just amazing. And so I thought this is just an experience, something to put on my CV. I was actually earning negative figures because I was spending more than I was earning because I was so useless at it. I was very good at learning the technical stuff, but when it came to selling, I just wasn't very good. So anyway, this is going too long. I should try and cut short. So that was a good sort of lesson in like maybe selling is not for me. But during that time, I did meet Gurdeep, who came. He was headhunted. He became my manager. He became my mentor, and then we became, we got married. A year, 2 years later, we were married. So suddenly, like my plans of like, oh, this is just an experiment, and I'll go back to India and then I'll get my proper job. Suddenly, it was like, oh wait, I have to live here now. So that means, that plan B no longer exists. So I have to make this plan work. So that's kind of where I think the unscriptedness had already begun. And for me, unlike a lot of people from IIMs, I feel no, this sounds mean, but I feel no sense of loyalty or gratitude to my MBA because it didn't help me. In fact, in some ways, it hindered me because people say, "Oh, you're overqualified. You've got a master's. Why would you want this job?" And I'd be like, no, that's fine. I'm happy. No, no, no. So I actually, after a while, I even dropped it from my CV.
that's very interesting.
I de-emphasized it so that it did not become an obstacle. So you can understand why emotionally I was like, So anyway, but then after I decided I was going to live here, I decided I didn't want to sell, but I didn't know what I was going to do. So instead of just sitting around and being depressed about it, I decided to temp, get temporary jobs. I signed up with a temp agency. And so that's kind of where my learning really began. That's where I learned computer skills, which I had none. I learned to speak English the way the Brits do. So I kind of almost became like a sponge, and I went into these. If you've never been a temp, I'll tell you what the advantage of being a temp is. That you can go in, you can do your job really well, but you don't have to make friends. You don't have to get involved in the politics. You're not going to be there for very long. So you just focus on your work. You just focus on what you need to do, and you learn and learn and learn. So I was literally like a sponge. I learned so many things while I was there. And so bit by bit, then I just climbed up the ladder. I got some qualifications, investment, so equivalent of today's CFA. I did that,
Yeah.
that. And then I got my first break in wealth management, and I stayed in there for 20 years, 18 years actually. But before that, I'd worked with somebody else who's also a fund manager. So yeah, so that was kind of how it all began. So that was phase one of unscriptedness.
I love it. I love this whole aspect of, yes, all of us kind of come out of our IIM batches, and we think that we are the ones who are going to change the world and solve world's hunger. But many of us, in fact, most of us, join some or the other management training program. Many of them, while they promise the world to you, end up being a lot of like early understanding of, hey, this is how the world works, and not the fanciest of jobs. While in your case, as you're saying, like even that did not happen, so it felt like almost like a betrayal of trust on, hey, this degree was supposed to buy me all of these luxuries, which maybe it isn't. But the other thing that I really took away from it was this, that you need to learn on the job. And yes, that can open doors, your degree will open doors, but it is that level of humility that you display, and the nature of being a sponge of learning on the job is going to get you the next break. So your first job maybe comes because of your degree, but everything else comes because of your own resilience, your own perseverance, your own learning. So thank you so much for describing it. Great. So, and then after 18 years, you decided to get more into coaching. So how did that pivot come through?
Yeah, so after 18 years, it wasn't so much that I decided to go into coaching. I actually didn't know what I was going to do next, but it was a confluence of events that were happening in my life around me that just made it impossible to ignore. You see, my then husband was my greatest personal champion. He helped me through those early years, which I describe as career wilderness, where I didn't know what I was going to do. And he always believed in me so much more than I had begun to believe in myself. There was a lot of shame for me. It wasn't that I felt my IM degree had betrayed me. I didn't feel that, because, if I'd stayed in India, I probably would have had a good career.
Yeah.
I had chosen to come here. For me, it was more the shame. Like I sort of withdrew. I stopped really connecting with because I didn't want to tell them that I was temping and I was earning like £3-4 an hour, doing admin jobs, loading dish, whatever, all the sort of stuff that now when I look back was really good grounding for me. But through all of that, my husband believed in me. He believed I could be so much more, that, I had so much potential. So anyway, but when I took on my job, and when the children came along, and he, very progressively, magnanimously decided he would stay at home and look after the kids so I could go and have my career, I was obviously like blown away, so grateful. But I always said to myself, the day I feel like I don't love my job anymore, I have to consider whether it's worth leaving my children behind, and that day did come. And it started to happen early 2014, when I really started to feel, I no longer wake up in the morning looking forward to my day. Something is not right. And then at the same time, things in my home were not going well. My kids were a bit older by then. My daughter was 14. My son was coming up to 10. And my husband, bless him, having spent so many years being full-time parent, after a while the children don't need you so much anymore, right?
Yeah.
He never found something else to occupy him, and I think he had a lot of time on his hand. He was obviously facing some other issues too, that he struggled with that, and he began to develop a very unhealthy relationship with alcohol, and all of this had a ripple effect, which maybe for the longest time I was trying to not really. I was hoping it was just a passing phase, that it would, but it wasn't. And so that all came to a head, and I had to then make a choice, and I made that choice to leave, and I negotiated an early retirement. And then it took me a little bit of time to figure out what to do. So initially I was trying to find jobs that would be aligned somewhat to what I did, but not the same thing, because I didn't want to do the same thing somewhere else. But they weren't quite working. And it's another powerful lesson, like when coming from India to here, suddenly your qualifications don't matter. In a similar way, when you leave a company and you have a job title, as soon as you leave it and you leave that title, that you are just you.
Yeah.
It is not a given that that will follow you and will help you. That's why for a lot of people there's a lot of fear leaving a job before they find another one, because there's so much leverage to find another company while you are still employed with someone else, because then you have a fallback option. So I didn't have that. And so
Rohini, can I interject for just a moment here? So, when you decided to make the choice of leaving, um, was there like a financial planning aspect to it as well, given you had been working for some time, but you were also the lone warrior in the money making game of your family? So, what was the financial calculation for that?
yeah, so that's a very good question, and it's a really important consideration. I would never recommend somebody just take the leap, especially if you've got family and responsibilities and a mortgage. I had financial cushion. I think one of the things about me and my then husband is that we never upgraded our lifestyle every time I got a promotion or a pay rise. We still live in the same house that we bought 25 years ago. I still drive the same car, and so I was very, we spent money, don't get me wrong. I was not a miserly person, but I also was prudent, and so I had savings. I was also a partner in my firm. Okay, so I became a retired partner, and that had certain benefits. So I still, amazingly, for several years after that, I still shared in the profit of the company. So I had a financial cushion, which meant it was not such an urgent thing, which gave me the space, and that's why it gave me about a year and a half, 2 years to actually figure out what I wanted to do. And it's only after that I came to the conclusion that I could go into coaching. But again, I still had to train, I had to do all the things. It wasn't like it was going to start paying off immediately. Yeah. So
Got
that
it. Okay.
financial cushion was a safety net for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing it also with so much of like honesty and humility, because these are generally not easy things to share. So, you took your time to understand what interests you, because obviously you are leaving for the reason that, hey, I want to be excited about what I do with my time. So, how did you find that out, and what was the journey on like finding your next path?
So what I realized is that for me to get answers to some of these really big questions that every one of us has, by the way, it's not just unique to me. And I was looking for answers externally, like on Google, as you know, Google is my guruji. I learned so much from Google-ji, as I call them, and books and things like that. But ultimately, they were not my answers. And I had to find a way to discover all these answers. And I realized that the more pressure I was putting on myself to find the answers, the more they were getting away from me. It's like, when this slightly tangentially, when sometimes you have this really, really lovely dream or interesting dream, and then as you start waking up, you try and remember, and it just goes away. It's like almost like it just dissipates. Like you're trying to hold on, wait, I want to remember it, and it just goes away. It was like that with these answers. Like they would bubble up and then suddenly they would go away. So I thought, you know what, I'll just have fun with my time. I had this cushion. So that's what I did. I spent time with my children. I started cooking because until then my husband was the main cook in the household. I took care of all the household chores and I loved it, like I loved even washing up. It sounds so bizarre, but all these mundane things that I never had time for, I just loved it. I listened to my music. I went for walks. I took my son to school. I had time to listen to their story. It was just beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. And then I also became a hula hoop because I had been hula hooping already for fun. And some people had said to me, you know what, you're a really good hula hoop teacher. Why don't you do it like more formally? And I thought, yeah, why not? And so I trained to become a hula hoop fitness teacher, and then I started to do classes. But it wasn't paying, it was never going to be like my income, it was just fun. And the money I made, I donated to my charity because at that time I had a charity as well. So I think in answer to your question, I allowed myself to just be, to do the things I loved, to learn, to really get to know myself in a way that I never had time for. So I could know what really meant something to me. So that when I created the next career path, it was coming from a place of, um, you know, resonating with my core values. So that's what I did. And then I wrote my book, which again was like, oh, everyone say, oh, you write so well. Why don't you write a book? Okay, then I'll write a book. It didn't mean nothing about writing a book. And so I wrote this book, and all these lovely women came forward. And there was one man, too, in there. It was my lovely classmate who's sadly no longer with us. And, and it wasn't just a book of collection of stories. Some people think that's what it is. It was actually like I'd collected pieces, and I wove a tapestry around these different pieces with my understanding of the role of a woman, in our homes, in our families, and in society, and more crucially in this very feminist era, that actually most of the women could not have achieved what they did if they didn't have somebody who was their personal champion, and very often that person was their husband.
Yes,
So it's not about like, female power should be that we don't need men, but it's more about how can we work with the men in our lives or with the other women,
I
because
love it so much. If I can, the reason why I joined Google is my husband, because I came back from my earlier job one day. I used to be in HR, and one person was resigning, and she said, "I'm going to Google." And I came back. I said, "Hey, she has joined Google." And she says that there are other roles, but I'm doing HR, that those roles are in digital marketing. Do you think I can ever get there? And he was like, what gives, right? Like, there's no penalty of trying. So why don't you apply for it? And just that one thing of somebody being your champion. And as you said, someone believing in you even more than you believe in yourself. It can be anyone, right? It can be a sister, it can be a best friend, it can be your parents. In both of our cases, it ended up being our husbands. Um, Really, really made all of that difference. So thank you for bringing out that memory in me. Thank you so much.
no, you're very welcome. And it's so true. And I wish that more people would acknowledge that, more people would show gratitude for that. And I'm always, even though things between my then husband and I kind of changed very significantly. Now we're not, he's not my husband anymore. But I will always, always remember him with such grace and gratitude. So anyway, so I think that book had one particular woman who had also been in investment in the investment world. She was an investment writer, Harriet is her name. And she then became a coach, a health coach. And she was just so vibrant and so kind of like, wow, living her purpose. I'm like, I want to be like that. So she really inspired me. And yeah,
What's the book called, Rohini? Sorry, is it
um,
is it What's in Your Backpack, or an
no,
earlier
What's
book?
Your Backpack is a more recent one. It's called Leading Ladies. And it was about, women who had, found their own way of sort of creating purpose and, following their passion. And so they're very, very different stories, and they're all very, very uniquely, some may be more inspiring, more interesting than others, but it all depends on where you are in your life. Anyway, so
Yeah.
that was a book, and that I credit, and Harriet is the one I credit for actually helping me see that I could be a coach. But also, I realized as I started coaching that some of the things I did in my coaching session with my clients, I was already doing when I was a portfolio manager, working in wealth management. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the connecting the dots happened afterwards. I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't such a different. It's not like completely separate to what I was doing before. There are some similarities.
Beautiful. I also resonated quite a bit with when you were talking about just being and like enjoying the of almost mundanity or the mundaneness of life, because day to day there's just hardly any time to really sit back and assess like whatever I am doing, what parts of it am I enjoying. My kids, I have two kids, a 6-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. So am I like really being that mom? And while, we also get fed a lot of this thing of, hey, as parents, you should stay away from having that guilt on how much time you're spending with them, as long as you're spending quality time with them. This aspect of spending quality time with your parents, your spouses, your significant other people in your life, as well as your children, can only come when you kind of like take that pause, do it very, very, um, you know, knowingly, and not just keep it to chance. So thank you for putting that as a reminder as well, what that break brought for you.
Thank you. Yes, and it's a shame that so many people feel they can't afford to have that sort of time, unless something happens that makes them step back. So I think if there is a way for us to create opportunities to do that every so often, because our children grow up so quickly, right? I mean, your children are 6 and 3. I mean, my kids are now 24 and 21. Where did the years go? So yeah, definitely treasure them while they're still with you and young.
So for the coaching, the transition to coaching, just coming a little bit into that, you say you write you're a leadership, life, and money coach. So was that mostly organic, or did you have to go through certain learning paths and certifications for that as well?
Yes, so I think all of those things. It began with just life coaching. Was it just life coaching? Life coaching, and I did the courses, the accreditations, but every so often, something would grab my curiosity, and I would go down a certain rabbit hole, and then I would think, oh, this is so interesting, and I would learn more about that. So I think that's why it's kind of grown from being life. And then I realized that, so much of what I did in wealth management was understanding how great leaders actually performed, how good businesses, what things they did. And I've always been very sort of a fan of responsible capitalism. I think that there is a bridge between socialism and the rampant capitalism can be built by social, sort of charities, not for profit, behaving a little bit more like a business, being careful about how they spend their money and being more accountable to how their money is being used. And for businesses to be a little bit more caring about the employees, their communities, all those things. It's not just your shareholders you should be caring about, right? So in between those two things, there's something called responsible capitalism or a responsible enterprise. So I think for me, to help leaders to understand how to be that way, to see that the old paradigm of, it's all about profit, all the other stuff is all goody stuff, it doesn't matter, it's just a cost, is not true. And there's enough
Yeah.
studies there to show that even on stock market performance basis, that over long periods of time, companies that do the right thing actually perform better.
Yeah.
So I sort of started to weave that in. And so the leadership coaching became an equally important thing. And more recently, for about 2 years, until about a year ago, I was a money coach alongside what I was doing, where we basically helped people to just get a grip of their personal finances and give them some simple strategies and tools to make their money work harder. So I left that and I've sort of woven that into my overall, which is why it's a bit of a mouthful. I hate that I call myself a life leadership and money coach. It sounds so pompous. But essentially, the way I think about it is that our lives include all of those aspects anyway. So when people say, oh, I want career coaching, yeah, we still need to explore a little bit about who you are when you're not working, right? If you're considering just your life, we still need to consider what you do for work, because you're spending a lot of time working. And, is it making you deeply unhappy? Are you coming back drained every day? And, so I think for me, it's quite holistic anyway. But sometimes having those labels help people think about their problem and then think, oh, yeah, she can maybe help me with that. So,
In fact,
mm,
sorry,
no,
sorry, I feel like I'm interrupting you.
no. I
Uh,
get for England, so please interrupt whenever you feel you need to. Yeah.
So that was reminding me of this term of like board of directors of your life. Like companies have people who advise them on at different levels. Some of them are organic in terms of like people who are already working with the company in some capacity, but then there are other people who come in externally. Uh, I find coaches like that. Obviously, there are your loved ones who might be able to give you a lot of advice on a day to day basis. But when you need to pause and kind of like get that outside in, but also a lot of inside out perspective on why I'm doing what I'm doing, because most of us are just like running in this autopilot mode. Hey, when's the next promotion? When's the next rating? When's the next appraisal? When's my next kid's birthday party? How do I climb the social ladder and so on? Someone coming in and helping me take charge of like, okay, this is what's happening, and like almost being a mirror to myself. I think the whole concept of coaching is amazing. I've had a few wonderful coaches in my life, so that must be like really deep work that you do with your clients, right?
I love it. I love it. And you're so right about the fact that, you can have people in your life like your husband, your parents, your close friends who provide you a kind of mirror. But I think what happens is with them, they are also very emotionally entangled with you. So, and sometimes, especially childhood friends or parents, they've seen you from the time you were a baby to now. So it's difficult for them to disentangle their perspective of you based on how they've known you. Whereas if you bring somebody who doesn't know you in that way, who's completely, independent, who doesn't have that emotional attachment to you, they can be a different kind of mirror. So I think there's a role for all of those. Board. I love the board of directors of your life. That's a great expression, and yeah, I think they all play a role, and I think we need to discover for ourselves what is the kind of person we need right now to help us gain clarity, which sort of neatly brings me on to my book, the latest book, which is What's in Your Backpack. Because what you were saying earlier about, we're so focused on, career, maybe family, social status, whatever, that imagine this backpack that you've carried ever since you were like a tiny baby, and you started to accumulate. You were that sponge, like, when you're a baby, you're just absorbing stuff, right? And I'm sort of a huge fan of compounding growth. So you can just imagine the compounding effect of constant accumulation, and maybe not a lot of time to declutter or to see, well, what do I need? What am I carrying that doesn't even belong with me anymore? So no wonder by the time we get into our 30s, 40s, we're like so tired and we don't even know why. Like, why am I so tired? Why do I feel so unmotivated? Like, my life is everything I ever dreamed of, and I'm still not happy. What is it? what is going on with me? What's wrong with me? Like, am I depressed? Do I need therapy? Do I, whatever? I mean, the possibility is that there's a bit of all of that, but actually, you're never going to know until you stop, take that metaphorical backpack off your shoulders, put it down, open it, and take a look inside. And the whole book is really a very gentle sort of invitation to do that in sort of very simple ways. And I think that my coaching has been that basically. Obviously, it doesn't do all of the things that are in the book, but it very much is depending on what the client, where that client is, what is their challenge, what do they need. And so, to your question about how that's been for me, I love it. My previous job, I loved very much, by the way. I thought it was the best job in the world. And I didn't think I'd want to do any other job for as long as I lived, or, until I retired. But this job is even better. So, hey, great. This job is amazing because, I get to actually see people blossom into the person they can be, or, the person that they need to be for their own well-being.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That sounded almost like the story of my life in terms of just like when you entered the stage of late 30s, early 40s, and you start thinking about, all right, wait a minute, was this what life was supposed to be? Am I living my best life? And as you said, like, hey, from an external perspective, I'm doing so good. I have a house of my own, two beautiful children, a happy marriage, and so on and so forth. Why do I feel empty inside?
Wow.
And then still having to almost put that facade on of not saying that I'm unhappy most days, but uh, on the days when I'm not, to say that no, all good.
Yeah.
The default answer of how you're going being great, and then like reflecting back later in the day, am I? So
Yeah.
thank you for saying all of those things. And so just to understand a little more about the book, are you saying that somebody who's reading what's in your backpack, if they were to follow along, they're able to almost coach themselves, if they're able to follow the instructions? How does the book go?
So the book is in different parts. So, I kind of set the scene very much about, what I mean by backpack, what I mean by the concept of abundance. And also I've introduced something, a framework called the 7 Cs. It sounds very cliche, but, it's something that I created back in 2017. And I used to run workshops on the 7 Cs, to creating breakthroughs, to creating abundance. And they're very common sense things. When you read it, you're like, I knew this already. But as you and I know, that just because something is simple or common sense doesn't mean it's easy, or that it's something that we are using in our everyday life. So it's an invitation really to reflect and to look at yourself with a more compassionate, honest gaze, and make some small changes. So each of the C's is kind of, it's full of obviously it explains the concept of what I'm on about, but it also gives a story of, so I had some of the people who came forward and very kindly, had a conversation with me. So even though I didn't sort of give them a structure, like, I'm going to talk about the 7 Cs, but I wanted to understand how they had got to where they were, and how, what were the skills that they came in with, what are their challenges. And so I was able to marry it with what I was talking about in these different Cs. And so it sort of helps people to also maybe think about themselves through someone else's life, and think, yes, I resonate, yeah, that woman there, I can resonate because I feel that. And then you learn something about yourself through that. But then at the end of each of those chapters, there's some prompts, some questions for you to reflect on. And you can just take one question per week or one a day. It's completely up to you. I also invite people to journal, some of the reflections, because it's very powerful to put it in writing. So I think at the end of the day, the book is really it's just a tool, and people can use it any way they want. They can use it in partnership with somebody else, where two people reading the book then discuss it, but they can start being their own coach in a way, to some extent. And then, of course, if there's something that they really think, oh, this is so good, maybe I could have a conversation with Rohini about this, then, of course, they're very welcome to reach out. And, if I can help them as a coach or in some other way, then that's also something that can be had as an option.
That's an amazing resource, Rohini. So first of all, thank you for putting that together. And also, it's definitely going into my own reading list. One, I think, almost the last question. So now, when you think of like being an author, being a coach, and all of these things, and like talking to all of the people that you have in your life, uh, is there like something that comes to mind that everybody should maybe think of and should take away from this conversation?
I think if there was one thing I want people to take away from this conversation, is to remind yourself that you are unique and you are amazing, and you have come into this human life with, there was a reason why you chose this lifetime, you chose the family, your parents, whatever, even though you don't remember why you did it. And sometimes the experience you've had, you may think, well, I couldn't possibly have chosen this. Why would I? I'd have to be mad to have chosen such a difficult life. But you did. And for every experience we've had, there was a reason that we had it, because we had to learn something. So I would say that's what I want people to take away with, that you are unique, you are amazing. The experiences you're having are all part of your journey. Some of them will be fun, some of them won't be. But remember that it's the things that challenge you more that you learn the most from. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you've got a challenge, think of it as a learning opportunity, but equally remember that you don't have to do it alone. Because a lot of us feel that in order to be strong, in order to prove that we're really resilient, that we have to go alone. And I've done that myself. And I realized that it wasn't like that. I just had to ask. I just had to believe that there were people there for me who could help me. And so I think that's what I want people to take away, that this is a life where you have the most precious gift, which is time, that none of us know how long we've got. I mean, recently in the plane crash, there were 3 people on that flight that I knew. It's never happened to me before, where I've lost, people I knew in such a dramatic and traumatic way. But that's life. It could happen to any of us. So I think for us to really become mindful, like, how am I spending this precious resource that is my time? And I have a way, I have it in me to make a change. So it is a good life on my own terms. That's what I want to take away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And one thing from the beginning of the discussion, that there's no shame in accepting that's something that you think you should be great at. So sales skill, as you mentioned in the beginning, if you find yourself struggling at it, it's okay to change paths, and life will figure out its way. And as you said, life is long, and we should try to like live it as authentically as possible to us.
There was one other thing I wanted to say about something you were sharing about your own experience, is that, when we have a good life, we have a lot to be grateful for. And I think gratitude is a wonderful thing, and we should all practice gratitude. However, the darker side of gratitude is guilt. Okay, because when you're so grateful, like even the thought that I want something else or something more, you're immediately ridden with guilt. Like, I shouldn't, how can I be wanting more when I have so much? And look at all these people who have nothing, and look at them, they look happy, and that just guilt and shame are, on the sort of map of consciousness, vibration is the lowest vibration emotions. and we all have it. So I think the backpack analogy again is like, go in and see what low vibration emotions you have, because you don't necessarily need to carry them. Find a way to let them go.
Wow, that's so wonderful. I'm almost emotional. Thank you so much, Rohini. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I can't, I know we spoke about the whole I am thing, and why I am grateful that you went to an IIM is because through that you joined the Women from IIM group, and through that I came across you. So just this gratefulness of being able to cross paths and having these conversations uh, with you and a lot of our people like you. Thank you so much for giving me this gift of time.
Thank you. No, thank you, Swati. I've so enjoyed this conversation. It's been a wonderful, exploration of lots of things. So I really appreciate you for that too.
Thank you.